Peter Stegnar, you are the project manager of FSD's Sumsar project. Sumsar is a former lead and zinc mine in Kyrgyzstan. Can you tell us what the problem is in Sumsar?
The problem are legacy sites. They've been formed during the extensive production of lead and zinc in the former Soviet Union times. And at that time, the production was the only thing which happened there. After the production stopped, nobody basically took care of those sites, and people were simply left with so-called contamination sources around them.
When did the production stop?
After the disintegration, when the Soviet Union fell apart, so Kyrgyzstan became an independent country and inherited all the problems which were there from the former Soviet Union, from Soviet times.
And what did you expect before you started to work? What kind of problems did you expect?
Well, we were told, and from the previous historical information, we were told that the water is the major problem. So it was reported, the water was reported to be highly contaminated with heavy metals, which in the course of the mission turned out not to be true. So we concentrated specifically on the 3 sites and found out, following the results of the analysis, that instead of water, the major source of pollution is dust coming from the opened area of the tailing pile number 3, just located above the village of Sumsar.
But why is dust a problem, or how could it affect the people living in the village?
Well, dust is, people inhale air and they inhale dust particles, and these dust particles contain heavy metals, and the most important and the most toxic one is lead, and lead accumulates in the human body, and it could affect, if the concentrations are high, they could affect the human health.
Yes.
That's why this is one of the exposure pathways in such or in any environment, so you have to be careful what you are doing with this particular dust. And dust is everywhere. It's not only the dust which was there during the operation, it's also dust which was deposited on the ground, in the playground, on the leaves of plants, everywhere. And it's really important that we know what is the type, we know what was the size of the exposure, and based on our bioassay, this was not experiment, bioassay trial, so we tried to see if there is any significant impact via this airborne pathway to the humans. And the levels of lead in blood were found a little bit elevated, and the pattern of distribution was such that there was undoubtedly indicated the dust as a source of exposure, and exposure to heavy metals, in particular to lead. There was also arsenic, metallic arsenic, which is present as in the source of exposure, which was also a little bit elevated, but the levels were not so high. At least they were elevated, but not that high that would cause any kind of medical or health effects on the humans there.
So people are exposed to heavy metals mainly through dust, but the drinking water that they consume is generally safe.
Well, drinking water, the problem is that people are using drinking water from the river, and the river is under big impact from all 3 tailing piles, or all 3 tailing sites. Fortunately, there are some sources, the sources of drinking water deriving from those sites are, some of them quite highly contaminated, but the content, the amount is low. So the water coming into the recipient, which is then in the Sumsar River, which is then used for drinking water, they are diluted efficiently, and there is really no impact, even if this drinking water is used, even if this water is used for drinking. The other issue is the question of bacteriological contamination of drinking water. There is a lot of pastures around, and when the excrements and the biological contamination can come, into the water, and this could create another problem. We didn't address this issue.
So you found that people's drinking water wasn't necessarily safe. It was maybe contaminated, but not necessarily from the tailings. It was probably more from the cows and animals.
Exactly.
That
from other sources of
yes.
solution there.
Yes, yes. Peter, could you tell me, why did FSD go to Sumsar, such a remote place? Why Sumsar? Was this your idea? Were people approaching FSD, or how come that FSD started the project there?
These were national authorities which requested FSD to come. There was a statement, in fact the request, that Sumsar is one of the most important, most dangerous tailing places in the country. So we were requested by the Ministry of Emergency Situations to go there and look into this, hoping that the ministry was hoping that we will get into the proper establishment of the remediation plan in the end. But then it happened that the situation changed, so we were not able to do this according to the remediation plan. But then we simply made a preliminary environmental impact assessment with quite a lot of recommendations, which could be very useful for the next planning of the remediation of the situation there.
During these 18 months, you have been very frequently in Sumsar.
Yes.
Did you manage to get into touch with the local population,
Yes,
to
course.
exchange with them? Can you
Of
tell
course,
us how the
yes.
people see this problem?
Well, to talk to the local population is the essential part of any project. People accepted us very friendly. They were, of course, all of them were concerned that this could harm them. But when talking to them and explaining them what that means, what is the contamination, how the metals can help, can have an impact on their health, so they really accepted this as a fact and tried to behave reasonably and without any fear, that no one would die of that particular contamination. But anyhow, if you want to do good, you need to protect them from those contaminants in the most efficient way you can.
Were you able to also give some recommendations
Yes.
to the people on whether they could lower their risk of intake of toxic materials?
Yes, when we talk about the dust contamination, potential dust contamination in the villages, to keep the surfaces clean, just to get rid of dust, not to go to the tailing piles, in particular the number one, which is open area, big open area, and the dust is simply spread around with the strong winds to the population, to the people living there. This would help a lot. Then also they should not use the 3 sources of the waters coming from the contaminated or from the exposure areas for any kind of use, in particular not for drinking, and also not for drinking for the animals, and also not for other domestic use like cars and laundry.
What kind of follow-up work is FSD planning now in the region?
Well, this would be relevant, to look into the pollution, the exposure pathways through the food chain, because people are very much concerned what they are eating. Drinking water, we already mentioned what they are eating, and the next potential project would be to look into the total diet, just to get the representative food chain pattern, the contamination, the levels of those contaminants in the food, and then tell the people at the end what the result is, if this could impact them.
Have you planned also any practical works as a follow-up?
Yes, of course. There are several, in fact, three sources of the water. It's not drinking water, it's the seepage and drainage water which is coming from the sites. And at some place people are using this water for their uses, for public washing, laundry, and so on. So this can be remediated, no matter what is the volume, but this is basically the source which should not stay there. So the remediation could be quite simple. So just to make a retaining pool or a kind of the vertical shaft to get to sediment, to make sedimentation of this stuff in the water, and just isolate or prevent the people to use this particular source or two more sources from other two piles for their usage.
That's good. I think what we should was I'm still having a problem. This thing is heavy and it's difficult to hold it still, but it's still on. You know, I cut afterwards the bits that you can use. Sure. I think we should go back to the beginning. Maybe I just think if somebody has never heard about it, you need to say 2-3 sentences. Maybe I start again and say, you are the project manager of the Sumsar project in Kyrgyzstan, a former lead and zinc mine. But what's the problem there? And maybe you should say a few more things on in Soviet times there was and so on. I don't know, maybe a little bit broader, like to give the setting, and that these are rural people and they depended entirely for their livelihoods on this thing, and now it stopped 30 years ago, and what is left is just something like this, maybe?
Legacy's problem, okay.
Maybe I start again, I do again, okay. Peter Stegnar, you are the project manager of FSD's Sumsar project. Sumsar is a former lead and zinc mine in Kyrgyzstan. Can you tell us what the problem is in Sumsar?
The problem are legacy sites. They've been formed during the extensive production of lead and zinc in the former Soviet Union times. And at that time, the production was the only thing which happened there. After the production stopped, nobody basically took care of those sites, and people were simply left with so-called contamination sources around them.
When did the production stop?
The production stopped in, when was that? I don't remember exactly. In 74. It was in the mid-70s, yeah.
In the mid-70s,
In the mid-70s stopped. Then after the disintegration, when the Soviet Union fell apart, so Kyrgyzstan became an independent country and inherited all the problems which were there from the former Soviet Union, former Soviet times. People live in poverty. They have very limited jobs. Also, the medical care, social care, schooling, and this stuff is quite limited. They really live in misery, and on top of that, they are surrounded by the legacy from the heavy metals, for instance, production, and also down there from Shekaftar, from radioactivity, uranium production. So it adds to their poverty even more. And the worst thing is that there was no information available, so people didn't know. They went to the place, they were looking for the scrap metal. They've been even playing on those tailing piles, without knowing that this could be harmful to their health. So this was the main contribution of the FSD project. There's to look into the current situation, find the potential and in fact the real sources of contamination, and give some kind of preliminary instructions or guidance how to do to the people how to live in this particular area.
When you did this study during these 18 months, you have been very frequently in Sumsar. Yes. Did you manage to get into touch with the local population, to exchange with them? Can you tell us how the people see this problem?
Well, to talk to the local population is the essential part of any project. People accepted us very friendly. They were, of course, all of them were concerned that this could harm them. But when talking to them and explaining them what that means, what is the contamination, how the metals can help, can have an impact on their health, so they really accepted this as a fact and tried to behave reasonably and without any fear, that no one would die of that particular contamination. But anyhow, if you want to do good, you need to protect them from those contaminants in the most efficient way you can.
Were you able to also give some recommendations to the people on whether they could lower their risk of intake of toxic materials?
Yes, when we talk about the dust contamination, potential dust contamination in the villages, to keep the surfaces clean, just to get rid of dust, not to go to the tailing piles, in particular the number one, which is open area, big open area, and the dust is simply spread around with the strong winds to the population, to the people living there. This would help a lot. Then also they should not use the 3 sources of the waters coming from the contaminated or from the exposure areas for any kind of use, in particular not for drinking, and also not for drinking for the animals, and also not for other domestic use like cars and laundry and